Welcome to episode 21 of my Sanibel Chronicles. I'm a little bit late this week. I've been trying to work around some severe lightning storms in the afternoons. I didn't want to try to start this and then have the power suddenly go out for a few minutes. So here I am with episode 21. I want to welcome the new members that have recently subscribed. As I've mentioned countless times, those subscriptions are very important to the growth of this channel. And without them, I certainly won't consider them successful. So please share the videos, tell your friends, neighbors, relatives about this if they're familiar with Southwest Florida and care about true tales of things that occurred in this area. And also it's very important that you like on YouTube the channel, the different episodes, because that works in the algorithm and makes the channel grow on its own. So if you've recently subscribed, or those of you who have been with me since the start, I really do appreciate it. Now this episode today is going to be about Ding Darling. I wanted to try to do this in a storytelling mode, but it's difficult because I have the illustrations that I want to put in from time to time. Ding Darling was a prominent political and conservation cartoonist back in the 20s, 30s, and early 40s. He was syndicated in a couple of hundred newspapers nationwide. And for those of you who are not familiar with Ding Darling, I'm going to start off with a video that I shot. I didn't shoot it, that I took off the television about 40 years ago that explains Ding Darling's life. So we'll go ahead and start off with the video.
To preserve wildlife refuge across the country. Tonight, Elizabeth Tardy introduces us to the man who designed the first duck stamp, a man who is familiar to some Southwest Floridians.
Throughout his lifetime, Ding Darling was a political cartoonist at the Des Moines Register newspaper. And he was a great outdoorsman. He liked to hunt and fish. In the 1920s and 30s, he became concerned with the development of the environment and natural lands. Soon his cartoons began to rally support for native birds and other wildlife. Darling was convinced the duck population was declining, and he was sometimes accused of wanting to conserve the waterfowl so he'd have more ducks for sport. But his interest was broader than that.
He was important in that his thoughts and his perception at a time when most people weren't thinking about the environment, he thought about preservation and ways to enhance the natural systems. In the 30s and 40s, when we were thinking probably more about the Depression and other things.
In 1934, President Roosevelt appointed Darling as chief of what is now the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Soon afterwards, Darling designed the first federal duck stamp. Proceeds from the sale of these stamps each year go towards acquiring lands for wildlife sanctuaries. All this month, Darling's work is on display at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington.
He was a bit of a visionary that combined two styles of art, a very serious style of art, which is reflected in his duck stamp itself as an anatomically correct rendering of birds. And as a political cartoonist, he also had the cartoonist's ability to summarize a crisis in maybe one or two panels and convey a message with very little caption, but with a lot of emphasis on the plight of the waterfowl.
Darling won 2 Pulitzer Prizes and almost every other award for cartooning, but he always said his Pulitzers were not his best work. He was exceedingly popular with the people he worked with, known as a charming, friendly, independent, and strong-willed man.
Sometimes his cartoon on page 1 would not agree with the editorial position on the editorial page. He went his own way.
McDonald says Darling's cartoons were the best read feature in the red. For years, Ding Darling spent his winters on Captiva Island. As a conservationist, his love of nature and wildlife gave him a sense of responsibility to protect them.
He was very sensitive to the problems that Sanibel was facing, Sanibel and Captiva. He was concerned about development and encroachment of development on the natural systems. He was very concerned with the status of some wildlife species. He was a very friendly person.
In the 1940s, Darling pressured President Truman to acquire land on Sanibel for a wildlife refuge. Truman finally gave the okay for more than 5,000 acres to be left untouched. And after Darling's death in 1965, this area was renamed in his honor. Here, visitors will experience the beauty and peacefulness of wild animals and birds, such as egrets, raccoons, bobcats, alligators, turtles, and snakes.
Ding Darling had the exceptional ability to foresee the extinction of wildlife and the inevitability of air and water pollution. He spent his life fighting to maintain more natural land like this.
In the Refuge Center, programs and displays provide a little education about the island's development. Environmentalists hope this will help their conservation efforts.
We've got to continue to get the message out to the public, to the new generation coming along, that it is important to preserve the environment, and education is an important part of this refuge.
Ding Darling was not completely opposed to development. Those who knew him say he saw nature and development as one basic system, which needs a constant balance of management and protection. Elizabeth Tardy, Eyewitness News.
This first photograph is Ding Darling at work in his studio producing a cartoon, and you may wonder why he was called Ding. The next illustration shows his caricature he did of himself plus his trademark signature. Ding is just an abbreviation of Darling. The story of Ding Darling starts here in Southwest Florida in 1935 when he and his wife, on his brother's recommendations, hauled their house trailer, camping trailer, from Des Moines, Iowa to Captiva Island, just north of Sanibel Island. And he wrote up an account of those travels in his book that he published. And here is an image of that book. It's still available. You can find them on eBay or some other online sites. It's a fun read. This next photograph is Ding with his daughter Mary and his grandson Kip. Mary married a gentleman in Iowa named Dick Koss, and their son therefore was Kip Koss. I knew Mary quite well and Kip also. When Ding Darling arrived on Captiva, he, being a prominent conservation-minded individual, he got together with residents of Sanibel Captiva that were trying to save the islands, trying to preserve them. One of the earliest efforts that started the conservation ethic on the islands. And in 1939, with Ding Darling's assistance, the Florida legislature passed a special act declaring that all of Sanibel and a small section of southern Captiva were now a state wildlife refuge. And this is one of the signs that were posted here and there about the islands. And of course, you can see the cartoonish pelican. We can tell that it came from the hand of Ding Darling. This next image is Ding, who was an avid sportsman, not only a conservationist, he was a fisherman and a waterfowl hunter. It's he and Belton Johnson, who was a prominent guide on Captiva back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, in a skiff, and I believe they're probably fishing in Roosevelt Channel. and that's a waterway between Captiva and its smaller neighbor, Buckeye. This next shot is Ding and his wife Penny, and on the far right is Alice O'Brien. Alice O'Brien was quite a unique individual. She was a wealthy woman tied to the lumber industry, I believe in Minnesota, and she had a yacht, and she would come down the Mississippi each winter and arrive on Captiva and spend the colder months there. This next card or image is the card that Ding Darling personally signed when the people there were attempting to get a national wildlife refuge proclaimed on the islands. And this is the card that Ding signed in the push to foster that happening. This next image is a Christmas card that Ding Darling did and gave to refuge manager Tommy Wood in 1950. Now, color illustrations by Ding were quite rare. There's not many left around. And this one now hangs in the Ding Darling Refuge Education Center. Now here I'm going to try to put this into a story type line. I'm not going to identify the images one by one. I'm going to try to just later put them in where I believe they belong. Okay, there's not many people left that knew or had conversations with Ding Darling. I happen to be one of them. I know of at least one woman who still lives on Captiva that was friendly with Ding, and there's still a couple of people left on Sanibel, long time Sanibelians, that I'm sure at least they had the opportunity to meet Ding. So that's unclear in my mind. But on December 3rd, 1959, I had the rare opportunity to meet Ding Darling. He had sold out all of his Captiva properties and was planning to spend the rest of his winters in Clearwater, where their son was an invalid after a very serious automobile accident. But it so happened that for Thanksgiving 1959, they came back to Twin Waters Inn, and I don't know exactly how long they stayed. I know they were there from Thanksgiving to at least probably close to Christmas. But on December 3rd, they came and visited Tommy Wood, or Ding did. Mrs. Darling didn't come. Came to visit Tommy Wood at the refuge. And it was rather early in the morning, and I was in the process of painting the flagpole at the refuge headquarters at the Sanibel Lighthouse. And this shot is my children a couple of years after I had met Ding at the flagpole. And in the background, you'll see a sign, and that was the headquarters sign, because back in those days, you came into the Lighthouse Reservation headquarters along the Gulf of Mexico. So this car drove up and parked near the stairs going up to the refuge office, and this elderly man got out, and he looked around and saw me, and he walked over to me, and he said, "Hello, young fellow. I'm Ding Darling. You must be the new man." Well, I was only, I think, 22 years old, and I says, "Yes." and I told him it was a pleasure to meet him. I knew quite a bit of his cartoons, and one of my favorites was the one he did to help save the key deer down in the Florida Keys. And it was a wonderful cartoon. It depicted the hunters burning the upland, driving the key deer into the water where they would be shot and clubbed. The key deer population got down to around 25 before there was any real effort to protect them. And now they're well populated in the mid-Florida Keys around Big Pine Key, where the key deer National Wildlife Refuge has been established. Well, Ding went up the stairs. He asked me where Tommy was, and I told him he was in the office. And he went upstairs and went into the office. And a little while later, I could see Tommy sitting at his kitchen table through the window. So I knew they were in there having coffee. So I finished painting the flagpole, and about that time, Tommy shouted out, "Hey, Charles, come on up and have a cup." So I set my brush down and went upstairs and had coffee. And Ding Darling spoke rather loudly, and he had a booming voice. And I just picked up every word. And we talked primarily about waterfowl. He was always interested in waterfowl. He asked about how productive the Bailey Tract was. He wanted to know if his well was still flowing, providing additional water to those wetlands. And then suddenly he got off on sea turtles. He wanted to know how the sea turtles on the islands had fared over the past summer in '59. And Tommy told him that they had done well, that there wasn't much take of turtles that summer as far as he could tell. And then he added that he said Charles is interested in sea turtles. In fact, this past summer he did some work trying to protect the nest from predators like raccoons. Well, Ding Darling really picked up on that and went on about how important that was. And he told me that I should really work on that and try to get the community involved, because there were certainly people on Sanibel Captiva that just loved those little turtles, and they certainly had the finances to help such a program. So that's where I got my initial push from Ding Darling to really begin to enhance my sea turtle conservation efforts on Sanibel Captiva. So some other words were said, and I thought I'd better get back to work, even though I had been invited by my supervisor. So I left and went to work. Well, the next, I think it was the next Friday, near the end of the day, Tommy said to me that I'm going to do a waterfowl survey in Pine Island Sound and Charlotte Harbor tomorrow morning. I'd like you to go with me. So I said, great. I had flown a few times with him since I'd started work earlier that year, and it was always enjoyable to get up in the air and see the countryside from upstairs. So this is the aircraft that we had. It was a Piper Super Cub at that time. As you can see, it's on floats. And for those of you who may be interested, you can tell this is a pre-Donna, Hurricane Donna photograph, because way in the background you can see one of the old fish houses that was situated in Tarpon Bay, and that was taken out by Hurricane Donna. This photograph is before we moved the aircraft to the seaplane canal in the belly tract that I mentioned a few weeks ago. So we get in the airplane and we flew up over Pine Island Sound, starting at San Carlos Bay, and the sun had just risen, giving enough light to get airborne. And imagine today, as it is today, but all through Pine Island Sound were rafts, hundreds, perhaps thousands of lesser scaup ducks and coots. I don't think they've just dwindled over the past, 60 years or so. It's really different in the number of migratory waterfowl, migratory water birds that utilize this area of Lee County or Southwest Florida anymore. Well, we got that done, and we had finished up Charlotte Harbor, and suddenly he banked the aircraft, and we landed on a large, primarily mangrove island with some upland named Cayo Palu, and near there was a large oyster bar exposed. It was near low tide, so we landed the aircraft. He said, "Come on, get out, we're going to go oystering." So he came around to the luggage compartment of the aircraft and pulled out some gunny sacks. And we walked up in that oyster bar, and we collected 2 sacks full of beautiful, mature oysters. He was satisfied we had collected enough and put them back in the aircraft. Then we took off again, went over just a few miles to what is now called Cabbage Key. And Tommy was a friend of the owner of Cabbage Key, so we landed there, and he got a bucket out of the storage area and picked out some nice large oysters. He says, "Come on, we're going to go up and have a cup of coffee." So we walked up the mound, Calusa Mound, that Cabbage Key is famed for, and knocked on the door, and his friend came to the door, welcomed us in, and we had a cup of coffee, and Tommy paid for the coffee with those beautiful oysters. So all of the socializing was now done, so we got back in the aircraft, and we headed south towards Sanibel. Suddenly he banked the aircraft again, went in, landed on the surface of San Carlos Bay, and taxied up to an expansive mudflat that was exposed by the low tide. I didn't know what was up here, so he put out a small anchor, as he did on the oyster bar, to keep the aircraft from floating off. And he went around to the compartment and pulled out 2, they weren't hooks, they were metal rods that at the end had a division, and the 2 sections were about that far apart, and then the rod was inserted in an old broomstick. So he gave me one of those. He gave me a bucket. I said, what are we doing? He said, "Well, we're going to get some stone crabs." So we walked up in this mud flat. Tommy had given me a bucket and a rod, and he took his and put it down in this burrow in the ground. It looked like an aquatic gopher tortoise burrow. There was a hole in the mud, and there was an apron of material that a stone crab had pulled out to dig his tunnel in which he would, or she would, protect themselves. So he put his rod down in this hole, and you could hear a clunk, clunk, clunk on the metal. He said, that's the signal that there's a crab in there. The crab is going to hold the rod, and we're going to slowly pull it out. He says, now this is legal. We're not spearing the crab. This is a legal way to take stone crabs. So he pulled the rod slowly out, and here came this enormous stone crab. He pulled it a couple of feet away from the tunnel and set it down. It had a grip on the metal, and he bent down and grabbed it by both claws, so it couldn't grab him. And he snapped off the complete largest claw, the crusher claw. And he said, no, we can take two, but I don't believe in taking two. I just take the crusher claw, and I release the crab. So I had my lesson, and we each started wandering around on the mud flat. And within an hour, we each had at least a half a bucket of crab claws, and the tide had started to flow. The water was coming in over the bar, so we went back to the airplane and loaded the crabs and got airborne and came back to Sanibel. Well, the first thing you do with stone crabs is you boil them, and then after they're boiled, you let them cool and then refrigerate them. Well, I went on over to my house next door, Lighthouse Quarters 2, and Tommy was going to go ahead and take care of cooking the crab claws. And I went home, and later on I was out on the porch doing something, and all of a sudden I heard a god-awful scream coming from Tommy's house, and I dashed down my stairs and up his stairs, ran into his kitchen, and here he was, a stone crab claw in some kind of reaction, had opened the claw and had Tommy by the thumb. Blood was rushing everywhere. So he put it under the faucet, and between the two of us, we got the crab claw free from his thumb. It was quite a painful experience. So then the next step in this process, it was, we took the sacks of oysters and we suspended them off the old Coast Guard pier on the bay side of Sanibel to keep them alive. And the stone crab claws were refrigerated. So the next Saturday, he told me I needed to go with him, and we drove with the crabs and the oysters up to Captiva and went to the cottage where Ding Darling and his wife were staying at Tween Waters Inn. And it so happened that his wife was out shopping, and we sat there on a little table, the three of us, on the porch of that Tween Waters cottage. Tommy had brought along a bottle of Early Times, one of his favorite beverages, and the three of us sat there on the porch. Tommy had already cracked the stone crabs, by the way, that morning. And we sat there drinking Early Times, eating stone crabs and some of the most delicious salty oysters you've ever tasted. And of course, the conversation was melty there. It was just a great experience. Ding told stories of his hunting trips, little tales about the duck stamp that he designed in 1935. It was a great education for me, and something I'm very proud to have had whiskey and oysters and stone crabs with Ding Darling. I got carried away in my storytelling, and I forgot to mention another image attached to Ding Darling. This is his fish house, as he called it, that is situated in Pine Island Sound on the east side of Captiva. And this is a building that he built in 1942 as his office. And originally the walkway had a ramp that he could raise when he was in his fish house working, doing his artwork, to avoid disturbances by people that were coming by to visit. This is a more modern photograph. This was taken relatively recent by Christy Anders, who allowed me to share it. Christy was a co-worker of mine at one time at Ding Darling Refuge. She went on to work for the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation. And in this photograph, under the building, you can see her husband, Red Anders, who has arrived by boat to pick her up after she had had a meeting regarding Ding Darling. So thank you, Christy. So here is a little guest I have this morning that I'd like to show you, just as an aside, a little extra. I'd like to introduce my little buddy sitting on my shoulder. This is Mutt. I have two barking tree frogs that I named Mutt and Jeff. Barking tree frogs don't occur on Sanibel, but they do range in sections of the nearby mainland here in Florida. And these are neat little frogs. They make nice little pets that keep me busy, and paying to get crickets to feed them just makes life a little bit different. Let's see if I can get them and hold them up where you can see them. See how this camera works. Get a close up. There he is. Barking tree frog. And the reason they're called barking is because when they're in chorus during the period they're in the wetlands seeking a mate, from a distance they sound just like a group of dogs. And I have a video clip of a barking tree frog in action making his sound. So Mutt says goodbye, and here's the video clip. With that, I'll say this will be the end of this episode. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. And this is Charles LeBuff and Mutt, over and out. I'll see you next time. Don't forget, if you haven't, subscribe. Thank you very much.